Young people have been dealing with a lot these past couple of years. While some of us were still in school or maybe getting our first jobs as adults, we lived through COVID. On top of that, we've also been living in political and economic turmoil for our entire adult lives.
Other countries have used tariffs against us for decades, and now it's our turn to start using them against those other countries.
We and our children are going to be the ones who are the most impacted by the worst effects of climate change, and also the most impacted by Elon Musk's governmental reign. Of course, every generation has had their fair share of hardships. The silent generation lived through the Great Depression, something that I'm living through right now in my mind. Baby boomers were drafted into Vietnam, unless they were rich. Generation X lived through Reagan, but so have the rest of us. Millennials witnessed the Twin Towers fall, which is something that I wish I could have lived through. Maybe then I could understand it better. Maybe then I wouldn't make so many jokes about it. When it comes to Generation Z, well, baby, you've named it and we've seen it, including porn at a very young age. While we're soon to be phased out from the media within the next couple of years due to Generation Alpha growing up, right now we're still at the center of many popular discussions online. Young people are all the rage. Just ask Diddy. Today, the discussion is all about our supposed repackaged bigotry. Now, the first time I heard the phrase repackaged bigotry was in a YouTube video posted by Not Even Emily a couple months ago. I'll link her video down below. Basically, the term refers to the idea that Gen Z has rebranded offensive terms and ideas back into the popular zeitgeist. People have even used the term repackaged bigotry as a way to sell the idea that we have overall become more conservative as a generation. While some meanings of the phrase may hold true, the idea that Gen Z is more conservative than previous generations is widely overstated and misplaced. Today we'll be tackling the evidence online as to why it seems Gen Z has become more bigoted, but also why we're likely not becoming overwhelmingly more conservative. Like everything great, the phenomena of Gen Z repackaging bigotry and supposedly becoming more conservative starts online, but inevitably ends up having real-life consequences. Obviously, just because you, for example, shared someone's full name and address only online, doesn't mean that it won't have negative effects on their real life. I'm going to try to split this video right down the middle. A decent portion of it will focus on the online bigotry that Gen Z has recently partaken in. The other part of the video will center on the rise of conservatism not only within Generation Z, but also within the country as a whole. Yay. We know that people online are extremely rude. It's always been that way, but the past few years online have been especially ripe with people straight up bullying one another. The joke online for a while now is that Instagram comments are some of the worst for this kind of behavior, which isn't untrue, but I do think that lately the internet as a whole has become a better breeding ground for bullying. I will say, however, before we move on, that Instagram comments are a special type of evil. Instagram basically filters comments to the top based on which ones are getting the most engagement. That's why you'll often have to scroll really far to find comments from mentally stable people. If you so much as even breathe a letter of the LGBT alphabet in a reel, you are getting death threats right there in those very comments. People have no class anymore. Whatever happened to privately messaging people to tell them how you're going to brutally murder them? You can't say for certain, though, that a majority of these comments are coming from bigoted Gen Zers. I myself have gotten plenty of terrifying comments from old people. It was a mistake to teach them how to use phones. In general, it seems that people nowadays are lacking empathy for one another. Capitalism will do that to you. I keep telling everyone, community is important, but they always stop listening as soon as I mention communism. This empathy problem, while having real-life effects, is becoming increasingly more prevalent online especially though. I'll link a video down below from Madison Brown where she talks about Gen Z's empathy problem in more detail. Add on to this that people are afraid to be sincere, which means more people who are always trying to be funny, despite the fact that they're not, leaving insincere and offensive comments on every single post they come across online. People are also becoming increasingly more isolated due to so many different factors: a lack of third places, the fact that COVID happened, cell phone addiction, social anxiety, and an anti-collectivist attitude that will only increase as America continues to separate itself from every country that we once had strong positive ties with. It's no surprise that younger people who are often more terminally online than older populations would go full circle and begin to reintroduce offensive language that we once thought we had eliminated as a society. As you can see, answering the question of why people are more mean online isn't easy. Let's get back to the topic at hand though. I'm going to break down the way that young people specifically have seemingly started to repackage bigotry. Now, the easiest way for me to do this is by going through every ism in the book. Comment down below which one is your favorite. Sorry, I'm just looking some stuff up to make sure that I've categorized every minority on planet Earth so that someone doesn't comment down below claiming that I left someone out on purpose because I'm a xenophobic, racist, homophobic cocksucker. That's the thing, isn't it? For a while, it seemed like American society was working its way up to being at least somewhat progressive. Certain terms people decided weren't PC, so therefore we should stop using them.
Are you purposefully trying to use words that assert your male privilege?
Examples include, well, I'm not going to do that. While correcting people for using offensive terms isn't a bad thing, I think that sometimes this can go too far. Now, I'm not saying this from the perspective of an anti-woke far-righter. I'm saying this from someone who's often classified as a leftist, but who also loves dark humor. Before Twitter became a Nazi hellhole, you could find liberals getting offended over things that truly were not major causes for concern, leading people to claim that all of them were too easily offended. When you grow up feeling like you can't say certain things, of course some people are going to take that way too far in the opposite direction, leading to this repackaged bigotry we're seeing now. In reality, Gen Z is actually one of the most progressive generations as of yet, statistically speaking, and one of the gayest.
Let's make that an even bigger margin.
Despite this though, it doesn't surprise me that a certain subset of us took right turns. Being afraid to say the wrong thing isn't an excuse for becoming, say, a Nazi, of course, but it could be a reason for someone falling down that pipeline. One of the best examples of this repackaged bigotry are the commonplace ableist jokes that are rampant online. If you want the truth of it, ableism is actually one of the most socially accepted forms of bigotry. So I don't personally see it as surprising that the R word is still being used, even by supposed progressive Gen Zers. Linguist Caitlin Green told Vox that ableism is an easy one to ridicule as a concept. We have these discourses that come up every once in a while on social media where someone will be like, telling me not to use DoorDash is ableist, or like, telling me I have to smile when I'm at my customer service job is ableist. And then everyone piles on them and they're like, oh my god, these online woke people, they're out of control. Ableism is the vector that leads to stern think pieces about how wokeness has gone too far, Green adds. This apparent increase in ableism within the younger generation, however, didn't just start with people suddenly dropping the R word more and more. What's with Gen Z casually using slurs that millennials work to remove from the general lexicon already? Why are Gen Z kids casually and constantly using "that's so R-worded"?
Dear Gen Z, can we talk about the R slur and the F slur? I'm a high school teacher and I hear the R slur and the F slur almost every day. And I think that is so odd. When I was growing up in the early 90s, we were taught you do not say the R word, and we were also taught you don't use the F word, right, for gay people. That was very common practice. Like, no one said it. It was, you were in trouble in school, you were in trouble with your parents if you said it. You did not say it because everyone knew those were highly offensive words. And so, to my shock, in the last year or so, students are saying the R word all the time. There are students saying the F slur all the time, which I find so weird, right? Why are we regressing, right? If we knew things were wrong in the 80s, the 90s, early 2000s, then why are teenagers in 2023 using these slurs, right? Using these really offensive words.
As one Redditor stated in their reply, the floodgates of the R word, which is a crazy string of words that come out of my mouth, were actually open when certain jokes started to pick up steam on places like TikTok. Although they're not really jokes, since jokes require a build-up and a punchline. The build-up for these is autism, and the punchline is autism bad. A common reply that you might have seen in TikTok comments lately is it acoustic? Acoustic doesn't have anything to do with music in this case, it's basically a stand-in for the word autistic. There are tons of videos using this phrase to describe people or animals doing silly things, and also tons of comments under creators' videos where people are using this as a way to use the word autistic as an insult. That's really it. One video I found on TikTok consisted of a woman responding in a very well thought out and respectful way to a comment like this, with the replies under her video being filled to the brim with just straight up ableism. Now, I didn't even know that this phrase was a thing until last year when I uploaded my video on Millennial Core TikTok. When I was making that video, I noticed that a lot of the Gen Zers who were making fun of those cringy millennials weren't just making lighthearted jokes. They were straight up bullying the creators, with a lot of that bullying centering around ableism. For example, there was this woman who got very expressive when she asked an Olive Garden waiter if you could buy their special cheese graters, leading to all sorts of harsh comments making fun of her for literally just getting really excited over some cheese graters. Let's be real though, people love making fun of autistic people. They are a common scapegoat for bullying. Why do you think that one of the most common experiences of being autistic is feeling incredibly different and ostracized from others? Before this, it was just the word autistic being used to describe anything that looked or acted weird. I remember once when I was in 9th grade, I described phones that capitalized every letter within a sentence as autistic. At the time, I didn't think there was anything wrong with saying that. Well, who's being called autistic now? Me. In all honesty, most of these words and the meanings associated with them were never actually vanquished from society. It's naive to think that. I do, however, think that it is more shocking when a young person says things that are genuinely ableist or homophobic because they're supposed to be the ones who are against all of that. Let me tell you right now, none of you would have ever survived in my school. Allegedly, the term acoustic started as an endearing and joking term used between fellow autistic people. although I wasn't able to find any evidence of this. Pretty much every example I found of someone using this term was when it was being used with a negative connotation.
Yes, people have subbed in autistic as a replacement for calling people the R slur. However, this isn't anything new. People have been doing it for years. It's just gotten more acceptable. The exact same thing kind of happened with the "Are you acoustic?" joke from a few months back. Now, I was never a fan of it in the first place because it was anti-autistic bullshit disguised as a joke, when in reality, autistic people just used it as a way to discreetly be ableist towards other autistic people, often those with higher support needs. And then when they were rightfully upset about it, they got brushed off for being too sensitive and taking a joke too seriously, despite the punchline just being autism. It creates this problem where that kind of behavior then gets parroted and mimicked by non-autistic people because they see autistic people making an ignorant joke in the same manner that they would. They see autistic people making the same excuses that they do when they get called out for similar shit. And in their minds, that gives them the green light to be ableist in that specific way because it's been co-signed by other autistic people, and they even have a little bit of plausible deniability because they aren't explicitly saying anything wrong.
Go watch toy? Huh? Watch toy? Huh? What's this? What's this? What? Go get it. Go. See, is she autistic? To see, it doesn't seem so endearing when I use it like that. Also, she didn't do the things she was supposed to do for this bit, but you get what I'm saying. It's crazy. Shit! I'm not supposed to say that word either. Well, at this point, I might as well just start saying another phrase that is even clearer proof of the rise of ableism within Gen Z, as if ableism could rise any more in society, is the phrase, "Are you restarted?" Do I really need to explain this one? Unlike the word acoustic, there really is no way this can be used as anything else other than a negative term meant to replace the R word. Again, the joke here is just that someone is acting stupid or weird or in a socially unacceptable way, so I'm going to call them an offensive term in order to make fun of them. How original. Honestly, this is going to sound crazy, but I have more respect for people who just flat out call people the R word as an insult, instead of those who are trying to pretend like they're simply joking by using it. A joke needs to be funny in order for it to be a joke. Now, I'm not just being sensitive when it comes to the R word. It actually has a pretty clear-cut history behind why people were pushed to stop using it. In a Vox article from last October, the author describes a phenomenon called the euphemism treadmill, where accurate terms to describe people of certain groups end up becoming commonplace insults. The author writes, "Idiot and feeble-minded were legitimate medical diagnoses in their day. So too was mentally R-worded. Over time, though, they all became words that lay people were happy to throw around as insults, which in turn meant that as medical terminology, they came to feel humiliating to the people they were supposed to help." They also mentioned Rose's Law, a law that Obama signed in 2010 that removed the words mental from federal law and replace them with the words intellectual disability or intellectual disabilities. The R word is used to humiliate a person by comparing them to someone who has an intellectual disability, therefore clearly insinuating that they are stupid in the most extreme terms. Linguist Christopher Holm told Vox that ableism is what is fueling the euphemistic treadmill. I take this as evidence that ableism really is pretty significant in our culture. And he is exactly right. An article on the Special Olympics website from 2018 referenced data from a Kantar social listening study where they reviewed nearly 50 million social posts in the US over 2 years. In their findings, they found that over 2/3 of posts about people with intellectual disabilities were negative, and nearly 29 million contained slurs. Example, using the word R-worded or other words combined with tard. I can think of one that fits into the latter group of words. Will Styler wrote for his blog, Notes from a Linguistic Mystic in 2012, saying, "I'm quite sympathetic to the campaign's aims, because everybody has the right to be referred to using positive, non-stigmatized language. Unfortunately though, forcing language change seldom works, and ultimately all they're really doing is ushering us onto the next euphemism. They may banish the R word, but soon enough you'll walk by a middle school playground and overhear, that movie was so developmentally disabled. Then we're right back on the treadmill again." It doesn't really matter if you're using the word to refer to someone who is intellectually disabled or not. If you call a straight person the F slur, you are still using a slur, regardless of intent. Although, I find it hard to believe that people call their friends slurs without the intention of using them as an insult, but I digress. Listen, I've made my fair share of jokes about the R word, and most of them were absolutely not funny at the time and still aren't. So I'm not a perfect example of what to do or what not to do. However, I'm not here to talk about comedy and act like a victim of PC culture, better known now as the woke mob. Because the people who are making tweets calling people the R word aren't stand-up comedians crafting a set. They're fucking Twitter users. You cannot excuse absolutely everything you say with a defense of it was just a joke. Because if you actually understood dark humor, you wouldn't just be throwing around insults as a way to be funny. You're actually just an unfunny asshole. The word autistic too may become a victim of the euphemism treadmill if people continue to use it and stand in words as a way to insult or armchair diagnose people as a joke. Maybe this is why so many autistic people rejected the new, supposedly more PC phrase, people with autism, from a few years ago. Autistic is not an insult. It's a descriptor, and while it is a real disability, it's also not something to be ashamed of. The resurgence of the R word and ableism isn't surprising since it never really disappeared, did it? Many progressives even still perpetuate ableism, even young people. On top of this, there seems to be a resurgence of people using gay and other similar terms as insults or even as stand-ins for the F slur.
You know, you really shouldn't say that.
Say what?
Well, say that something's gay when you mean it's bad. It's insulting.
While many people are somehow bold enough to tweet the R word in the Lord's year of 2025, young people online overall haven't reintroduced the F slur back into their vocabulary yet. I say overall because I'll tell you what, I heard the F slur at least 3 times a day when I was in high school. That's what you get when you live in the middle of nowhere in Pennsylvania. What I'm trying to say is that there are still plenty of people my age who are horrifically racist, homophobic, transphobic, etc. I don't, however, believe that Gen Z as a whole is deeply conservative. The statistics agree with me. However, are we on our way to becoming more conservative? That's the question that I hope to at least somewhat answer in this video. I do think that it is concerning that so many Gen Zers on TikTok have suddenly started to make more and more bigoted comments regarding different groups of people though. Like I was saying with the R slur, I haven't yet seen a major uptick in the usage of that word within the straight demographic. However, you might have noticed other words seeming to take its place. Zesty is a common one, along with fruity. Again, these are similar to the word acoustic in the sense that they could very well be used endearingly between queer people, but most of the time that they're used, it comes across as derogatory. At best, they are an unfunny way to refer to a man who acts feminine. At worst, using them is straight up homophobic. It's just a joke though. It's not funny though. To me, it's really weird for straight people to use words that are clearly synonymous with the word gay to describe random men online who act a little feminine, whatever that might mean. Remember how people used to ascribe gay to everything that was dumb or queer? Zesty and fruity also sound insulting when a straight person is using it to describe someone who is acting a little different from the norm. In essence, making fun of that person. My favorite by far of all the terms that young people are using nowadays is the word twink. That's a lie.
I fucking hate it.
Straight people heard the word twink and just thought it meant gay, so they began using it to describe any gay man, or just any man. Since all of you apparently need a refresher on what twink actually means, there are a few characteristics someone needs to check off in order to qualify as one. 1. This person is young, male, and typically white. 2. This person is relatively hairless. 3. This person is either skinny or slightly toned. 4. And most important of all, they are usually feminine and typically bottom for other men during sexual intercourse. Therefore, I am not a twink! Have you guys fucking seen my leg hair? I'm on track to becoming the next Sasquatch impersonator. Just because I act a little feminine sometimes doesn't mean that I'm a twink. It's so annoying to me because half of the people using it clearly don't know what it actually means. It can definitely have a broader meaning in some instances, some very rare instances, but overall, a guy has to meet some, if not all, of these attributes to be considered a twink. Sometimes, when I see a comment under one of my posts that just says the word twink, I feel like I've been hate crimed. I mean, geez, you're really laying it on thick. Just call me. The funniest instances online of this word are when people use it to refer to men who don't even come close to being twinks. You'll see a picture of Henry Cavill playing Geralt on Twitter, and without fail, some 16-year-old will comment twink under it. He's not a twink. Although actually, maybe you should call me one, because if Geralt was real, I'd want him all over me. It's clear that the people using these terms don't actually understand gay culture, because if they did, then the word bear would have increased in usage over time as well. All of these words are just used as fill-ins for the derogatory gay, and even the F slur in some instances. No doubt that the majority of people using these words under random TikTok videos are all young too. I once asked my mom if she knew what a twink was, and she just looked at me like I turned into Jeffrey Epstein. Gen Zers rebranding bigotry and even conservatism goes far beyond offensive TikTok comments though. I would highly recommend Matt Bernstein's recent podcast episode on how conservatism infiltrated pop culture, seeing how pop culture ties a lot into what young people are being exposed to online. You should also check out Khadijah Mbo's recent YouTube video which dives into the rebrand of conservatism and a lot of other similar topics that I'll be discussing today. I think that a lot of what is seen as Gen Z's rise in conservatism is instead a widespread ignorance among swaths of the generation. Now, of course, usually conservative and ignorant go hand in hand, but just let me cook for a moment. For example, the clean girl aesthetic, which Matt covered extensively in their podcast episode, isn't just an innocent aesthetic that TikTokers started partaking in one day. The clean girl implies that there is an opposite to it, a dirty girl. When most of the clean girl imagery is filled with young, thin, white, blonde women, it's easy to ascertain who is classified as dirty. Many young people may unintentionally take part in certain cultures or aesthetics without even realizing that they're doing the far right a favor by doing so. I'll use myself as another example. I love hunting. I love gardening. I love the country. If I stopped dressing emo and started posting exclusively about these things online without clarifying where I stood politically, then I may end up unintentionally promoting classic American values onto young people. Young people who, using me as a first step, could end up falling for the far-right seduction built on lies and hierarchy. I know what I'm saying may sound crazy, but you have to keep in mind that literally anything except the most explicit alternative, leftist, progressive, or whatever content could be misinterpreted by someone or just the first step in someone's far-right pipeline journey. I literally made a whole video about my aforementioned personal example. I don't think that most of these young people are purposefully promoting conservative values in an attempt to make homophobia or misogyny more normalized. I don't think that they're even aware of what they're doing though, which is an issue. To an outsider perspective, this may be why Gen Z is seemingly more conservative than young people have been in previous generations. Now, don't get me wrong, there is definitely, like I alluded to earlier, a decent cohort of Gen Zers who are conservative. In 2024, there was only a 4% difference between who people aged 18 to 29 voted for in the presidential election. Yes, I know that who someone votes for doesn't necessarily account for their entire political identity, but voting for Trump, especially this time around, tells me one of two things. You're either A, deeply misinformed, or B, you genuinely agree with his policy. Or both, like I said, they often go hand in hand, especially if you're allegedly from Appalachia.
Treat me like white teeth, don't get me dirty.
What I'm trying to say is that generalizing an entire generation as one thing or another does no good. Even a positive generalization is still a generalization. In a Vice article from 2021 discussing how racist Gen Z supposedly is, the author says, just how progressive are young white people when it comes to racism? And how far does their understanding or willingness for change actually go? Speak to young people of color, and it rapidly becomes clear that the idea that everyone in their demographic is a card-carrying anti-racist is just a crude generalization, and one that actually lulls us into a false sense of security. Now, you can definitely acknowledge and call out the fact that Gen Z may be unintentionally becoming more conservative by repackaging bigotry, but the idea that we are all becoming Trump supporters is pretty far-fetched in my opinion. However, it's not completely out of the question. In that same article, it said, a report from anti-extremism charity Hope Not Hate suggests that online extremist groups are taking advantage of these biases by grooming children as young as 12 to become teenage far-right terrorists, harassing minorities, and spreading racist propaganda to radicalize others in their age group. In the Hope Not Hate report, Cynthia Miller-Idris, a researcher of far-right youth culture, argues that expressing far-right ideas and taking on its imagery and language may provide agency for youth who feel constrained or let down by the adult world. No one is immune to propaganda, even the supposed ultra-progressive youngsters. Considering the fact that this country elected Trump for a second time, it would not be surprising to me if more and more people from my generation started to switch sides.
As we gather today, our government confronts a crisis of trust.
Mainstream media has always been slightly left-leaning, yes, but it has never been progressive within any real meaning of that word. Even if it was, for the past few years, far-right media has been getting the most attention. Fox News is the most watched cable news network in America. That says something. Moreover, independent media is becoming more popular than ever, and the main source of information for young people. The fact is, on every single platform, leftism is not what's overwhelmingly rewarded. It's conservatism. When we unintentionally platform these beliefs, it can cause real harm. For example, the cohort of young TikTokers who literally promote phrenology and physiology without even realizing it. Going on and on about how some people have angel skulls, upturned noses, projected chins and jaws, the good kind of skull, and others have witch skulls, hooked or downturned noses, weak and or recessed chins and jaws, the bad kind of skull. An even more documented example of this is Gen Z's supposed puritanical attitudes. It could be someone thinking that we shouldn't write bad characters in books because, well, they're bad and no one wants to read that. It could take the form of people being less tolerant to sex scenes in movies and TV. Maybe it's a high schooler claiming that you have a porn addiction because you occasionally watch porn. I definitely do so more than on occasion. It could also be people finding age gap relationships, even between two consenting adults, an issue because, well, I don't know, he was 10 when she was 2. Writer and screenwriter Joshua Conkle also tweeted about this controversy. There's a weird cultural thing at play right now where some young people think they're progressives while actually being deeply conservative. This mindset in young people stems from so many different things. For one, anti-intellectualism, which I'll get into a little later. Or maybe even the theory that I proposed at the beginning of this video. People are so afraid to say the wrong thing and be tarred and feathered by the internet that it creates a sense of moral purity, which ultimately leads us to regress as a society. There's a lot of examples online within certain subsets of Gen Z that can be used to make a point that we may be becoming a bit too puritanical for our own good. The puritanical examples that I just gave are actually all real opinions that are held by seemingly large swaths of the Gen Z population. fortunately or unfortunately. Now, if you really want a real video diving into Puritanism and purity culture, I would highly suggest that you check out ContraPoint's video from last year on the book series Twilight. Let's take it slow though, and fade to black when we get into the spicy stuff, because I wouldn't want to offend any of you with my sexual opinions. Of course, these examples that I'm going to cover are not the only values that are consistent in Puritanism. They are just the most commonly held ones within the Puritan Gen Z population. Let's take, for example, age gap relationships. It seems like most Gen Zers find age gap relationships pushing past 4 years or so to be inherently perverse and even abusive. Obviously, the main issue here is the overgeneralization of other people's lives and relationships, not necessarily Puritanism, but whatever. For example, before the couple split in May of 2023, many fans took issue with Billie Eilish's boyfriend Jesse Rutherford, who was 11 years older than her. When they first started dating, she was 20 and Jesse 31. However, as many fans noted, the two allegedly met when Billie was 16 and a huge fan of Jesse's band, The Neighborhood. On top of this, in August of 2023, when the two were still dating, Jesse released a song named POV, with lyrics that were allegedly about Billie Eilish. They read at one point, "She's been listening to me since 2013. I know she got daddy issues. Welcome to the family."
Why are we still here?
The pair's Halloween costume, the October before their breakup, was Jesse Rutherford dressed as an old man and Billie Eilish as a little baby. Other celebrity couples that have been hotly debated are Aaron Taylor Johnson and his wife Sam Taylor Johnson, who met in 2009 while working on the movie Nowhere Boy when he was in his late teens and she was in her early 40s with 2 children. And Beyonce and Jay-Z, who started dating when they were 19 and 31 respectively. Brittany Wong wrote for the Huffington Post in 2024 that, having grown up alongside the #MeToo movement, Generation Z is well-versed in unbalanced power dynamics and the language of consent. Justin Lay-Miller, a research fellow at the Kinsey Institute and host of the Sex and Psychology podcast, was quoted saying, "To some in Gen Z, age gap relationships read as being inherently exploitative because they perceive age discrepancies as necessarily creating a power imbalance that favors the older partner. In my opinion, age gaps once you've reached a certain age aren't that big of a deal. However, that doesn't seem to be the popular opinion within Generation Z. The issue within this debate is the idea that any age gap is problematic. Unfortunately, this seems to be becoming the popular opinion within Generation Z. Now, I've never been someone who is personally interested in the idea of dating someone a lot older than me. I have a brother who's 8 years older than me, so growing up, I was always cognizant of how big of a difference 8 years is between two people. However, as I'm now 22, the idea of being with someone romantically, but especially friendship-wise, who is in their mid to late 20s isn't that weird to me. Part of this is because I'm a lot older, and therefore more on a level playing field with someone of that age. The other reason though is because I'm limited as to how far down I can reach in age when finding friends or partners. Making friends with someone who's 26 doesn't seem all that crazy to me, but making friends with a high schooler does. The fact of the matter is that the younger you get, the more age matters. The difference between a 13-year-old and a 20-year-old is immeasurable, but add 20 years onto both their ages, and the two dating suddenly doesn't seem like that much of a big deal anymore. While age gap relationships can take any form, the most hotly debated ones are those between an older man and a younger woman. The woman is automatically a victim of the unbalanced power dynamic with the man, unable to consent no matter her age in relation to her partner. The man, automatically a creep. Why is he attracted to a woman who's younger than him? While you certainly won't find me defending Leonardo DiCaprio, a 32-year-old man dating a 25-year-old woman isn't automatically perverted or abusive. Again, things shift a lot the younger a person gets. A 19-year-old dating a 29-year-old is very strange, especially when you consider the differences in their lived experiences. One person in the relationship has a whole decade of experience over someone who just graduated high school a year ago. It is not necessarily puritanical to question these kinds of relationships. In her essay, The Pain Gap, author Ray Fisher Kwan writes, as quoted by El País, "We chose this. We're grown women now. We shouldn't infantilize ourselves by implying that some boundaries shouldn't have been our responsibility. In this process of framing guilt, it is the men who are infantilized," adds the writer. "We see them as incapable of restraint, victim to the woman acting upon them, helpless to draw a boundary or, even better, to critically analyze their desires." Age gap relationships have always been heavily stigmatized, but as Brittany Wong wrote, what's also changed is which parties tend to receive the brunt of the judgment. In the past, people were often scornful of both the younger and older partners in these relationships. That perception seems to have largely disappeared when you look at what Gen Z is saying, Lay-Miller noted. They seem to cast the younger partners as victims who are being preyed upon or groomed. She also notes that Gen Z may be hyper-focused on this because of their age. Every Gen Zer is not extremely out of touch, gallivanting on Twitter about how messed up it is for an 18-year-old and a 16-year-old to date. I find it extremely misguided to frame this debate as if every young person thinks this way. For example, there is data to suggest that men, even as they age, do actually prefer dating younger women. Being attracted to someone who is younger than you isn't inherently a bad thing, but not altering your dating pool as you age is deeply troubling. Just because old people grew up with 12-year-olds marrying off to 50-year-olds doesn't mean that Gen Zers criticizing age gap relationships makes them Puritan. Well then, what about our tendency to criticize sex in movies? The belief that sex scenes and nudity shouldn't be in movies is even more pervasive than Gen Z's age gap discourse.
You think I might find happiness in the animal kingdom, Ducky?
A 2023 study conducted by UCLA's Center for Scholars and Storytellers found that a significant portion of respondents 1,500 aged 13 to 24, 47.5%, believe that sex and romance are overly representative audiovisual media, and that a majority, 51.5%, would prefer to see more depictions of friendship and platonic relationships. This isn't necessarily a bad thing though. Media does need more accurate portrayals of asexual and aromantic characters. On top of this, the annual California Health Survey, conducted by the same university, noted in 2021 that the number of 18 to 30-year-olds who said they had no sexual partners in the previous year had reached 38%. In 2011, the same survey had shown this figure at 22%. Maybe young people just want to see more of their own lives reflected on screen. But unfortunately, that's not all this debate is about. There has been a subset of people online who have straight up advocated for the Hays Code to be brought back to cinema. Also known as the Motion Picture Production Code, the Hays Code was intended to be self-regulated guidelines for films to ensure acceptable content for American audiences. But as Kaylee Donaldson wrote for Pajiba, the Hays Code was bigoted to the bone. Female characters were usually ones who suffered the most under the rule against sex perversion. The banning of miscegnation helped to erase people of color from film in any sort of role that wasn't a racist stereotype. Anna May Wong, one of the few Asian stars in 1930s Hollywood, wasn't allowed to play the lead in The Good Earth, a drama about Chinese farmers, because her romantic co-star was a white man in yellowface, and the code wouldn't allow her to kiss him on screen. So they cast a white woman, who then won an Oscar for her troubles. Even the vaguest suggestion of queerness on screen was to be snuffed out or demonized. This was how the code worked. The idea that bringing back a code like this is anything but ultra-conservatism is a brain-rotted take. Pushing for movies and TV to be clean again is only helping to further the future that far-right Christian nationalists want for this country. Kaylee Donaldson argues in her article that by demanding Hollywood remove even more sex scenes from their cinema, then it would ultimately lead to representation as a whole regressing from any small strides that we've made in the past decades. One of the most egregious examples of someone completely missing the point was a Twitter exchange from February 2023 wherein a woman tweeted, "I hate nudity in TV shows. It never propels a story forward, and it's uncomfortable whether you're with your parents, boyfriend, or friends." With one of the replies reading, "It used to be disallowed. I wouldn't be against bringing such a rule back." Attached was an article which spoke in length about why old Hollywood movies have more class, claiming that they're nothing like the pornified, hollow, violent, and over-sexualized imagery that is all so common in Hollywood today. That doesn't sound like something I'd hear J.D. Vance say at all.
When I met you in the summer, so my heart beat sound.
Whether sexy exchange glances or heavy petting, carefully framed in the sheets or full frontal nudity, sexuality is an inherent part of the cinematic experience, because sex is an inherent part of our lives. To deny sex and sexuality in the cinema is to deny our own fully fledged humanity. According to research done in 2019 by writer Katie Hagen, only 1.21% of the 148,012 feature-length films released since 2010, according to the IMDb database, contain depictions of sex. That percentage is the lowest of any decade since the 1960s. The decrease in sex and nudity on the screen cannot be 100% blamed on Gen Z, however. It can likely be tied to an overarching change in Western ideals that is being reflected onto cinema, rather than young people's uninformed puritanical values. As for the example from Twitter, I have no way of confirming whether either of the people in that interaction are actually even a part of Gen Z. Who's to say that it's just us who are less keen to sex in movies and TV? I know my mom hates it, and I hate being in the room with her when it's on the TV, so. Another thing that we're missing here when we claim that Gen Z is becoming more puritanical is that a lot of our widely shared values are completely antithetical to those values of Puritanism. While Gen Z is definitely unintentionally aligning themselves with some aspects of conservatism, the real Puritans are actual conservatives who widely support a Christian secular government, who love banning books, and who love firing teachers for talking about racism. As was the case with their 17th century predecessors, today's Puritans are determined, or so it seems, to take control of our private lives. I would argue that while Gen Z definitely does have an issue with purity culture, I don't think that our generation as a whole is advocating for the banning of pornography. Yet. A young person with a tiny account posts something uninformed on this site, and older adults declare as more proof that the entire generation is irredeemable, and it never stops being ridiculous and pathetic to me. The majority of Gen Zers against sex scenes and nudity argue that these kinds of scenes are just unnecessary when watching a movie for the plot, which is of course why I watch porn. Why have some boobs or dick out when it doesn't serve a purpose? Violent action scenes can more obviously move the plot forward, but sex is not efficient. It is not strictly speaking necessary. It's messy and risky, and there is arguably nothing today's entertainment conglomerates want less than to risk alienated consumers. I brought up this exact point in the video that I made about The Idol in 2023. The entire show, to me, felt like a strange male fantasy, and when you consider who wrote it and what The Weeknd said in response to people's criticisms of the show, that claim isn't completely unfounded. The same thing could be said about the other creator's show, Euphoria, which to me suffered a lot from overly gratuitous sex scenes. To me, it's not that the sexual content itself is a problem. It's the fact that it felt inserted at nearly every point possible, despite the fact that the show isn't marketed to be an erotica. It's meant to be a show about teenagers struggling with drugs, among other things. While watching The Idol, I felt like I was being subjected to Lily Rose breasts at nearly every moment. It's not that I'm against seeing sex or nudity in cinema. I mean, it's especially impossible to watch an HBO show without seeing a ball sack. It's just that it's become trite to me. I am someone who loves to make sexual jokes. It's not that I'm some sort of prude, but sex scenes make me feel uncomfortable for some reason. Maybe that's not necessarily a bad thing though. It's good to feel challenged in your preconceived notions while watching cinema, even if it's in the form of two characters having steamy,
passionate sex.
At the same time though, for someone who isn't that invested in romantic or sexual relationships, you can easily become jaded with how sex obsessed it seems our culture is. When criticizing society's overemphasis on sexual and romantic relationships though, we have to make sure that we don't unintentionally become parrots for the same conservative beliefs that we reject. Obviously, we can't really ignore them at that point. We do have to keep a pretty close eye out for social media radicalization, obviously, but at the same time, I don't think these examples are actually evidence that Gen Z is secretly moving rightward, or that we should generalize an entire generation based on some ignorant social media post. It's kind of giving kids these days, to be honest. Our final example of Gen Z's alleged conservative beliefs is a lot less nuanced than the previous ones. As we saw in the 2024 presidential election, among young voters, women favored Harris by 26 points more than men. Political gender gap even wider than our generational divide with boomers, according to the 2024 NBC News exit polls. To a lot of people, it seems like Gen Z men are becoming more conservative and in turn more misogynistic. Of course, like I said at the beginning of the video, someone voting for Trump does not necessarily mean that they are a part of the far right, though it is a likely possibility. Regardless of someone's political views, a vote for Trump is still a vote for what he and his constituents espouse, including extreme misogyny. Let's not just take some election exit polls and run with them though. Young people overall still voted less in this election than they did in 2016 and 2020, if they were eligible to vote at that time. However, the damage is still done. To many people, Gen Z men's, especially white men's, decision to support Trump in wider margins than ever before has been taken as a sign of our generation's shift to the right, at least where young men are concerned. Following the election results, the phrase "your body, my choice" began trending, leading to a widespread harassment campaign directed at women and girls not only online, but also in schools. The Institute for Strategic Defense said the Friday following the election that young girls and parents have used social media to share instances of offline harassment involving the phrase "your body, my choice." They include the phrase being directed at them within schools or chanted by young boys in classes. The superintendent at Stevens Point School District in Wisconsin said in an email to parents that, in the days after the election, we have received reports of some students using the phrase "your body, my choice," often directed at female students. This kind of bullying and harassment from male classmates has not been an isolated incident, however, concentrated only to the time directly following the election. No, this upward tick in misogyny from young men has been reported on for years, and not only in the United States. In 2023, it was reported by The Guardian that Andrew Tate's violent misogynistic rhetoric was being parroted by young boys in UK schools. Last year, secondary school teachers began to notice pupils using phrases they didn't recognize. "What color is your Bugatti?" and "make me a sandwich." Now that teachers are catching up, they are worried about the corrosive influence of the extreme misogyny espoused by Tate. There seems to be an increased need for boys to control girls, a teacher says. There's an expectation from boys that girls are going to do what they tell them to do. In other schools, it's become a behavioral issue, with pupils mimicking Tate and sometimes even openly expressing support for him. Throughout this video, I've made a case as to how Gen Z is showing signs of a push to conservatism, but in reality, it's not just us. These kinds of dangerous ideologies, whether it's puritanism or misogyny, isn't a problem for just young people in their late teens and 20s. It's also a problem for Generation Alpha and the children who are being raised right now in the Third Reich of America. Of course, Gen Z's misinformed, but also, unfortunately, sometimes very well-informed and fully conscious bigotry is becoming part of the values that children are being exposed to online today. Let's not pretend, though, that the political climate as a whole is not the main reason for why Generation Alpha may be at risk of becoming one of the most conservative younger generations since Reagan. More evidence of younger boys espousing misogynistic beliefs was told by women's rights campaigner Laura Bates, who, as reported by The Guardian, before the pandemic visited 1 or 2 schools a week to speak with students about gender inequality. Laura claims that something shifted a few years ago, though, describing how during one of her visits, a boy sat in the front row, noticeably nervous but excited. Through her usual routine, he gleefully interrupted to debunk what she was saying with false statistics about rape and claiming men were more likely to be victims. This became the new normal. Bates began to ask the boys where they were learning the material. They always told her online. They showed her memes, images, and jokes that weren't obviously or directly from manosphere communities, but regurgitated their ideologies. Jessica Gross wrote in a New York Times opinion piece that the reason that the gender gap in voting seems so pronounced is not because young men have become dramatically more conservative. It's because of the political galvanization of the young women who came of age during the #MeToo movement, watching Donald Trump remain the leader of the Republican Party despite numerous credible accusations of sexual misconduct against him and witnessing the fall of Roe v. Wade. She then gives some basis behind the belief that Gen Z men are more conservative, citing how a smaller portion of young men identify as feminists when compared to young women. I like to add my own citations to that, though, because young men's disdain for feminism isn't simply because of the discourse surrounding the label feminist like she argues. For example, polling from 2024 done at Ipsos Polling for King's College, London's Policy Institute, and the Global Institute for Women's Leadership surveyed over 3,600 people, finding that 1 in 4 UK males aged 16 to 29 believe it is harder to be a man than a woman, and that 1 in 6 British men aged 16 to 29 say feminism has done more harm than good. Another study from Hope Not Hate surveyed 2,076 16 to 24-year-olds in 2020, finding that half of young men in the UK now believe that feminism has gone too far and makes it harder for men to succeed. Melissa Deckman, author of The Politics of Gen Z, found that, as stated by The Guardian, in 2022, 49% of Gen Z men said the United States had become too soft and feminine. Just a year later, 60% of Gen Z men said the same. Deckman found that those who agreed with the statement were far more likely to have voted for Trump in 2016. These are of course just a handful of studies and polling, but combined with everything else we've gone over, saying that Gen Z men are becoming more conservative is far from completely unfounded. Gross writes in her opinion piece saying that young men are, in fact, largely supportive of gender equality, though most are reluctant to call themselves feminist. Yet she provides no evidence of this supposed large support. I realize that just because a man has a negative opinion on feminism, it doesn't automatically mean that he is spreading misogynistic rhetoric. But it is, in my opinion, further evidence of how Gen Z men are becoming more conservative. First, it starts with the man feeling left behind by society, which I'm completely sympathetic to. But then that leads to sexism. And then that leads to intense misogyny. And in some cases, having just a negative perspective on feminism, while not completely without reason, can even lead to violence. The online growth of the far right is a significant problem, not least because of, as is Bates' main concern, the number of neutral boys, ones who aren't on men's rights forums or actively feminist, who are being swayed by the more extremist ideas about women without realizing it. This conservative shift can be tied to many different things though. Deckman, as described by The Guardian, has found that Gen Z men are becoming more conservative as well as increasingly indifferent to politics, bucking long-standing trends dating back to at least the 1970s that saw young people across the board voting liberal and men being generally more involved in politics than women. Meanwhile, Gen Z women have not only become the most progressive cohort in US history, but are also expected to outpace their male peers across virtually every measure of political involvement. Again, as some people have argued, some young men have begun to feel excluded by society. As the Western world has attempted to empower women, it has often at the same time taken to disempowering men. I know that I'm gonna have at least one person in the comments saying that I am spouting far-right dog whistles. But the thing is, I've been clear about my stances. I'm not some centrist podcaster saying this shit and then having Matt Walsh on in the next episode. I understand that people, especially women, feel adverse reactions to talking about men's rights when theirs are actually being revoked. But you cannot discuss young men idealizing the right without discussing why they may be doing so. Leah Stevens writes for the Socialist Alternative, saying, "The Andrew Tates, Jordan Petersons, and Elon Musk of the world have seized upon the insecurities of young men. Wondering why you're falling behind? Well, have you tried blaming those uptight, radical woke women in your life?" To add on to this, Lucas Martineau wrote for the Vermont Critic following the election, "Democrats can't just write off young men as lost to the right. They need a strategy that speaks to male anxieties without feeding into misogyny. One that offers economic hope and social belonging without scapegoating women or other marginalized communities." Despite all of this, I think that people are really overselling how conservative Gen Z men are becoming, and also the rate at which they're becoming conservative. As I've said throughout this video, generalizing an entire generation or an entire subset of a generation isn't really doing anyone any favors. The reality is that exit polls showed that people aged 50 to 64 voted a majority for Trump, and that over half of the electorate was voters aged 50 plus. Every generation has had its fair share of conservative members, even when they were young. However, considering everything that we've gone over, it would not be surprising to me if Gen Z continued on a path to conservatism through this idea of repackaged bigotry. Using the R word more frequently and posting bad talking points to Twitter are only the beginning stages of a political crossover, or in certain cases, radicalization. The ignorance that some Gen Zers are displaying online is not surprising when you consider what some people are calling a rise of anti-intellectualism within young people. The thing is though, anti-intellectualism has been rampant throughout America for a long time. How else could Reagan have been elected? I mean, I haven't seen my mom read a whole book my entire life, and she's 57. While perusing Reddit threads during the writing of the script, I found a quote that was commented a few times under a post made in the r/skeptics subreddit. "There is a cult of ignorance in the United States, and there always has been. The strain of anti-intellectualism has been a constant thread winding its way through our political and cultural life, nurtured by the false notion that democracy means that my ignorance is just as good as your knowledge." Isaac Asimov said that in 1980. And who got elected that year? Sorry. Okay, enough of Reagan, sorry. Generation Z are just the latest victims of anti-intellectualism's pervasiveness in our society. When you take into account everything that I mentioned at the beginning of the video, like COVID and being chronically online and isolated, it's no surprise that America's newest college classes are appalled by the idea of having to read a book. I don't think that there's a clear answer as to whether Gen Z is really becoming more conservative and bigoted. If you really want an answer from me though, the truth is, I don't know. There are reasons to believe that, yeah, we kind of are, but at the same time, we are, compared to other generations, one of the most progressive in history, at least in America. Yes, certain members of this generation are definitely going down a slippery slope leading to conservatism, but I don't think that it's intentional. That doesn't make it right, but it does make it a lot more complex than just saying that Gen Z woke up one day and just decided to become Trump supporters.
When I met you in the summer, so my heartbeat sound.
Well, this video definitely started out as a fun examination of Gen Z's ignorance, but ended up being an entire essay about how if we don't learn history and how to identify different kinds of propaganda, then we are set to repeat it. Give it a few years and Gen Alpha will be doing Instagram dances online to the song Okay Zoomer. Well, that's it for me, and that's it for this video. Comment down below if you think that Gen Z is becoming more conservative. Are you a part of Generation Z? Even if you're not, I'd love to hear your thoughts on this video. So comment down below anything that you want to comment down below. If you like this video, give it a thumbs up. If you like me, you can subscribe. I post videos about whatever I really feel like talking about. So if that sounds like your thing, make sure to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you know when I post a video. Before the video ends, I want to give a special shout out to my Patreon members who are part of my Alpha and Delta tiers. Thank you so much to Kat the Time Lord, Olivia Schutt, Romano Żurawko, and Zelkova Saltz. Thank you so much for your continued support. Seriously, I really mean that. And thank you so much to all my Patreon members. If you want to become a patron, the link will be down below. Anyway, I really hope you all enjoyed this video, but more importantly than that, I really hope I see you in the next video. You'll be there, right? Watching? You will, right? Right? You'll be there, right? Bye.